The rain was falling so hard that night that I could barely see through the windshield, even with the wipers on full speed. I remember thinking how strange it was that the weather matched the chaos inside my head. I had just put Danny down for the night after another exhausting battle with colic, and Ethan was finally asleep after asking for the 100th time when Daddy would come home. I was staring at my laptop trying to finish a design mock-up that was due the next morning when my phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. The voice on the other end was professional detached, the kind of tone that people use when they have to deliver news that will shatter your entire world. There had been an accident. A semi-truck, slick roads. My husband Logan didn't make it. Those were the words they used. Didn't make it. As if he had simply missed a flight or failed a test. Not that his life had been ripped away in a moment of twisted metal and broken glass, leaving me with 2 babies and a future that suddenly looked like a black hole. I don't remember much about the next few hours, except the sound of my own screaming. It came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I didn't know existed. Ethan woke up crying, terrified by the sounds his mother was making. Danny started wailing in sympathy, and I sat there on the kitchen floor, phone still in my hand, unable to do anything but keen like a wounded animal. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and pitying faces. People kept touching my arm, murmuring things about God's plan and being strong for the children. I wanted to scream at them. What plan? What possible plan could involve taking a 32-year-old father away from his babies? But I just nodded and thanked them and tried to remember to breathe. After everyone left, reality crashed down on me like a wave. I was alone, completely terrifyingly alone, with a 5-year-old and an 8-month-old baby. Logan's life insurance would help, but it wasn't enough to replace his income. I was a UX designer who worked remotely, which had been perfect when Logan was alive, and could help with the kids. Now it felt impossible. How could I focus on user flows and wireframes when Ethan needed help with his reading homework, and Danny needed to be fed every 3 hours, and I hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours in days? The bills started piling up on the kitchen counter like a monument to my failures. Mortgage payment due in bold red letters. The electric company's final notice. A collections letter for the hospital bill from Danny's last ear infection. Every time I opened my laptop to work, another bill seemed to materialize. Another deadline seemed to whoosh past me like a train I couldn't catch. My boss, Jennifer, had been understanding at first. She sent flowers to the funeral, told me to take all the time I needed. But by week 3, I could hear the shift in her voice during our video calls. Her concerned questions about my well-being started to be punctuated with pointed reminders about client deadlines. By week 5, she was CCing the department head on emails about my delayed projects. By week 7, she scheduled a formal performance review. "Sarah, I know you're going through an incredibly difficult time," she said, her face pixelated on my laptop screen, while Danny screamed in the background and Ethan tried to show me a picture he had drawn. "But we need to discuss your work product. 3 missed deadlines this month, client complaints about responsiveness. The Mercer redesign was due yesterday." I tried to explain. Danny had been up all night with a fever. Ethan's school had called because he had bitten another child, which was so unlike him that I had to leave work to pick him up and talk to the principal. The dishwasher had broken and flooded the kitchen. My car needed new brakes I couldn't afford. I was drowning in the mundane disasters of single parenthood while trying to maintain a career that required focus and creativity. 2 things that seemed to have abandoned me along with my husband. "I understand," Jennifer said in a tone that made it clear she didn't. "But we need to see improvement. Soon." That night, after I finally got both kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my bank account. The numbers didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Even with Logan's life insurance, even with my salary, the math didn't work. Childcare for Danny cost nearly as much as I made. After school care for Ethan added another chunk. The mortgage, utilities, food, insurance, student loans that didn't care that I was a widow. I put my head down on the table and cried. Not the dramatic, cathartic kind of crying you see in movies. The quiet, hopeless kind that leaks out when you're too tired even to sob properly. That's when I heard the knock on the door. It was past 9 at night. Nobody came by at that hour. For a wild moment, I thought maybe it was Logan, that this had all been some terrible mistake, that he would walk in and tell me he was sorry for being late and everything would be okay again. But when I opened the door, it was my parents. I hadn't seen much of them since Logan and I got married 7 years ago. The wedding had been tense. My mother, Eleanor, had made her feelings about my choice abundantly clear in the months leading up to it. She had pulled me aside at the engagement party and said in that cool, modulated voice of hers, "Are you quite sure about this, Sarah? He seems very nice, but he's a mechanic. You went to Northwestern. You could have done so much better." My father, Richard, had been more subtle but no less disapproving. He was a judge, a man who had spent his career rendering verdicts, and his verdict on Logan was clear in every interaction. The way he asked in front of Logan, "So what exactly are your career prospects?" The way he mentioned repeatedly the sons of his colleagues, young lawyers, and doctors' men, he clearly thought would have been more suitable matches for his daughter. The way he never quite looked Logan in the eye. Logan had tried. God, he had tried so hard to win them over. He showed up to family dinners in his best clothes. He asked my father about his cases, my mother about her charity work. He complimented the house, thanked them profusely for their hospitality. Never once lost his temper, even when my father made pointed comments about the importance of ambition and education. But nothing was ever good enough. The final straw had come at Ethan's first birthday party. My parents had shown up late, stayed for exactly 30 minutes, and left early. As they were walking out, I heard my mother say to my father, in a voice just loud enough for me to hear, "Well, at least the child seems healthy. Let's hope he inherited Sarah's intellect rather than his father's limitations." Logan had heard it too. His face had gone carefully blank, and later that night, after all the guests had left and Ethan was asleep, he had held me while I cried and told him I was sorry, so sorry for my parents' cruelty. "You have nothing to apologize for," he had said. "They're your parents, not you. You're nothing like them. You're kind and warm, and you see people for who they are, not what they do or how much money they make. That's why I love you." After that, we saw my parents maybe twice a year. Obligatory visits at Christmas and Thanksgiving, stilted and uncomfortable, where my mother critiqued my housekeeping and my father asked pointed questions about our finances. They sent cards for the kids' birthdays, but rarely called. When Danny was born, they visited exactly once, stayed for an hour, and my mother spent most of that time commenting on how exhausted I looked and suggesting I hire help I couldn't afford. So seeing them on my doorstep that night, 2 months after Logan's funeral, was surreal. My mother looked exactly as she always did. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, expensive cream, cashmere sweater, pearls at her throat, tailored wool pants. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine spread about graceful aging. My father wore his usual uniform of pressed khakis and a button-down shirt under a wool coat. They looked prosperous, put together, successful. Everything I wasn't. "Sarah," my mother said, not waiting for an invitation before walking past me into my house, "your father and I need to speak with you." I stood there stupidly holding the door open before following them into my living room. I saw them take in the scene with those sharp, assessing eyes. The laundry basket overflowing with unfolded clothes in the corner, the dirty dishes visible through the kitchen doorway, the toys scattered across the floor, Ethan's backpack dumped by the couch, my laptop open on the coffee table, a half-eaten sandwich next to it. The visible evidence of my failure to keep everything together. My mother perched on the edge of the armchair, careful not to actually touch any surface that might be less than pristine. My father remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, a posture I recognized from childhood. It was his courtroom stance, the one he used when delivering judgments. "We've been discussing your situation," my mother began. "It's clear that you're struggling." I wanted to defend myself, to say I was managing fine, but what was the point? The evidence of my struggle was everywhere. "We're prepared to offer our assistance," my father said. "We can provide childcare. I've retired from the bench, as you know, and your mother has reduced her volunteer commitments. We have the time and the resources to help." I should have felt grateful. I should have felt relieved. 2 months ago, I would have given anything for my parents to offer help, to show any interest in my children's lives. But something cold and hard settled in my stomach, some instinct I couldn't quite name. "That's very generous," I managed to say, "but I don't want to impose." My mother's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Nonsense. You're clearly in over your head. Look at this place. Look at yourself. You're exhausted. You're neglecting your work. Those children need stability and structure, things you're obviously unable to provide right now." The words hit like physical blows. I looked down at myself and saw what they saw. Sweatpants I had been wearing for 3 days. A shirt with a suspicious stain that was probably baby food. Hair I hadn't washed in days pulled back in a messy bun. Eyes with dark circles so deep I looked like I had been punched. "We're not asking Sarah," my father said, and there was steel in his voice. "We're telling you, we will pick up the baby tomorrow morning at 8. We'll keep him during your work hours. We'll collect Ethan from school and supervise his homework. This will give you time to focus on your career and get yourself together." "But I don't even know if that's what I want," I started to say. "What you want is irrelevant," my mother interrupted. "What matters is what those children need. And right now they need adults who can provide proper care and discipline. You're falling apart, Sarah, just like you always do when things get difficult." The familiar words, the familiar shame. I had heard variations of this my entire life. "You're too emotional, Sarah. You're too sensitive. You fall apart too easily. You need to be stronger, more disciplined, more controlled." And the terrible thing was, part of me believed them. Part of me thought they were right. I was failing. I couldn't keep up with the demands of work and parenting. I was drowning. Maybe my children would be better off with my parents during the day. Maybe I did need help. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to do this alone. "Okay," I whispered, "thank you." My mother stood smoothing her pants. "Excellent. We'll be here at 8 sharp. Have the baby ready. And please, Sarah, do try to clean yourself up. Your appearance reflects poorly on all of us." They left without hugging me, without asking how I was really doing, without even looking at their sleeping grandchildren. I locked the door behind them and slid down to the floor, my back against the wood. What had I just agreed to? But I was too tired to examine the question. Too tired to trust my own judgment. If my parents, who had raised 2 children successfully, who had achieved so much in their careers and social standing, thought this was the right thing to do, who was I to argue? I was just a widow who couldn't manage to keep her house clean or her work projects on schedule. What did I know? The next morning, my mother arrived at exactly 8. She didn't knock, just opened the door with a key I didn't remember giving her. She must have taken Logan's key from his things. The thought should have bothered me, but I was too busy trying to get Danny ready. He was fussy that morning, fighting the change of clothes, refusing his bottle. I tried to calm him, bouncing him on my hip, while simultaneously trying to find his diaper bag and my work laptop and Ethan's lunch money. "Give him to me," my mother said. And before I could respond, she had plucked Danny out of my arms. He immediately started to cry, reaching back for me. "He'll be fine," she said crisply. "Babies need to learn that crying doesn't get them what they want. Go to work, Sarah. That's why we're here." I hesitated. Danny's cries were getting louder, more desperate. He was old enough now to have stranger anxiety, and even though Eleanor was his grandmother, he barely knew her. "Go," my father said. He had appeared in the doorway, and I hadn't even heard him come in. "Your mother and I have raised children before. We know what we're doing." I went. I felt sick doing it, but I went. I sat at my desk and tried to focus on the Mercer redesign while my son's cries echoed in my head. But then something miraculous happened. For the first time in 2 months, I got work done. Real work. I made it through 3 client calls without interruption. I finished the redesign and sent it to Jennifer with an hour to spare before the deadline. I actually ate lunch sitting down instead of shoving crackers in my mouth while trying to soothe a crying baby. When I picked Danny up that evening at 5, my mother answered the door with him in her arms. He was wearing a clean outfit I had never seen before, something expensive looking with a little collar. His hair was neatly combed. He looked perfect. "How was he?" I asked, reaching for him. "He was fine once he adjusted," my mother said. "He cried for the first hour, but we taught him that behavior has consequences. He was much better after his nap." Consequences. I wanted to ask what that meant, but Danny was in my arms now, burying his face in my neck, and I was just so grateful to have him back that I didn't question it. The same pattern continued with Ethan. My father picked him up from school starting that Wednesday. When I arrived at my parents' house at 6 to collect him, he was sitting at their dining room table, his homework spread out in front of him, working silently on his math worksheet. "How was school?" I asked, kneeling down to hug him. He shrugged, not looking up from his work. "Fine." "Did you have fun at Grandpa and Grandma's?" Another shrug. "It was okay." My father stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. He did well on his homework. I've been teaching him multiplication. He's behind where he should be for his age. "He's only 5, I protested. "They don't usually start multiplication until 2nd grade. If you want him to be average, then by all means continue with the standard curriculum," my father said coolly. "But I assumed you wanted more for your son than mediocrity." The words stung as they were meant to. I gathered Ethan and his things and left feeling like a failure once again. But over the next few weeks, I had to admit that the arrangement was working. I was meeting my deadlines. Jennifer stopped sending those pointed emails. I even got praise for my work on the Morrison app redesign. I was sleeping more than 4 hours a night for the first time since Logan died. I could shower daily, eat real meals, even occasionally watch TV in the evening. My children were clean and fed when I picked them up. The house my parents kept them in was immaculate, orderly, calm. Wasn't this what good parenting looked like? Structure, routine, discipline. So why did I feel sick every time I dropped Danny off in the morning? Why did Ethan stop talking about his day at school? Why did I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, feeling like something was deeply wrong, even though I couldn't name what it was? I told myself I was being paranoid, overprotective. My parents were helping me. I should be grateful. But then I started noticing small things. Danny, who had been starting to babble and make sounds, went silent. He would stare at me with these huge, solemn eyes, but he wouldn't make noise. When I tried to play with him, making silly sounds to get him to laugh, he would just watch me unsmiling. I mentioned it to my mother. Is he making sounds during the day? Babbling, cooing? Of course, she said smoothly. He's very vocal. Perhaps he's just tired when you pick him up. But the pediatrician at his 9-month checkup was concerned. He should be making more sounds, she said, checking her notes. At his last visit 2 months ago, he was babbling quite a bit. Has something changed? My parents have been watching him during the day, I said. Maybe he's just quiet, because he's not used to the doctor's office. The doctor made a note in her chart. And these bruises, she pointed to Danny's upper arm, where there were faint purple marks. My stomach dropped. I don't know where those came from. Babies this age do tumble quite a bit when they're learning to move, the doctor said carefully. But these look like finger marks. Has anyone been gripping him too hard? No, I said quickly. Too quickly. My parents are very gentle. He must have gotten them from playing. The doctor looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes that made me want to cry. Pity, concern, suspicion. If you ever have any concerns about his care, she said slowly, please don't hesitate to call me. Or if you need resources, I can connect you with support services for single parents. I'm fine, I said, grabbing Danny and his diaper bag. We're fine, thank you. I wasn't fine, but I couldn't afford to not be fine. I couldn't afford to lose my parents' help. I would lose my job. I would lose the house. My children would suffer even more. So I told myself the bruises were from normal play, that Danny was just going through a quiet phase, that I was seeing problems where there weren't any, because I was still grieving, still stressed, still not quite stable. But then came the evening with Ethan that changed everything. It was a Tuesday about 6 weeks into the arrangement with my parents. I had picked Ethan up at the usual time. He had been even quieter than usual during the car ride home, staring out the window, his small hands clenched in his lap. At home, I made his favorite dinner, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese vegetables. He would actually eat a glass of chocolate milk, comfort food. But he barely touched it, pushing the food around his plate with his fork. Sweetheart, I said, gently sitting down next to him. Is something wrong? He didn't answer, just kept moving the nuggets around. Did something happen at school? Are the other kids being mean? Still nothing. I reached out to touch his hand and he flinched. Actually flinched like he expected me to hit him. My blood went cold. Ethan, baby, what's wrong? His eyes filled with tears. Big fat tears that rolled down his cheeks, while he made no sound at all. It was the silence that terrified me. 5-year-olds cry loudly. They sob and wail and make a scene. They don't cry in perfect silence like they've been trained not to make noise. It's okay to cry, I said, pulling him into my lap. It's okay to be sad. You can tell me anything. He buried his face in my shoulder and finally made a sound. A small, choked sob. I held him and let him cry, my own tears falling into his hair. When he finally quieted, I asked again, very gently. What happened, baby? He pulled back and looked at me with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. Grandpa says crying is for losers, he whispered. He says if we cry, it means we want to win the game. But winning the game means going to the quiet room. Every cell in my body went on alert. What game? What quiet room? Ethan's face crumpled. I can't tell. Grandpa said if I tell, I'll have to stay in the quiet room all night. And it's dark there. And the door locks. And I can hear Danny crying, but I can't get out to help him. My heart stopped. Where's this room? At Grandma and Grandpa's house. In the basement. Grandpa takes us there when we're bad. When we cry or when we're too loud or when we don't finish our homework fast enough. He says we have to learn to be better, that crying is weakness, that noise is chaos, that he's teaching us discipline. I felt like I was going to be sick. How often does he put you in this room? Ethan's voice got even smaller. Every day. Sometimes just for a few minutes if I'm good. But yesterday I cried because I missed you, and he put me in there for an hour. Danny was in there too because he wouldn't stop crying. I tried to hold him in the dark, but he was so scared. What about Grandma? Does she know? She's the one who tells Grandpa when we've been bad. She watches us all day and makes lists of our mistakes. Then Grandpa comes and he says we need to learn consequences. The room was spinning. I set Ethan gently on his chair and stood up, my hands shaking. I walked to the kitchen sink and gripped the edge, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying not to scream. My parents were locking my children in a room, a dark room, in a basement, every single day. The children I had entrusted to their care were being psychologically tortured in the name of discipline, and I had handed them over willingly because I was too weak, too tired, too broken to see what was happening right in front of me. I turned back to Ethan, forcing myself to be calm. Thank you for telling me, baby. You were so brave. You're not going back there. Never again. Do you understand? You and Danny are never going back to Grandma and Grandpa's house. But what about when you work? His voice was small, scared. Will you get fired? I don't care, I said, and I meant it. Nothing is more important than you and Danny being safe. Nothing. That night, after I put both children to bed, I sat on the floor of my bedroom and tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't just accuse my parents of abuse. They were respected members of the community. My father had been a judge for 30 years. My mother volunteered at the children's hospital, for God's sake. Who would believe me? And what proof did I have? A 5-year-old story. Faint bruises that could be explained away as normal childhood accidents. But I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't send my children back there tomorrow. I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard what Ethan told me. I called in sick to work the next morning for the first time since Logan died. When my mother called at 8 sharp, asking where Danny was, I told her he had a fever and couldn't come over. There was a long pause. I see. And Ethan? He's staying home too. I have the day off. Another pause. This is very inconsistent, Sarah. Children need routine. This kind of disruption is exactly what creates behavioral problems. He's 5 and he lost his father 2 months ago, I said. My voice tight. I think he can miss a day of your supervision. My mother's voice went cold. We'll discuss this later. She hung up before I could respond. I spent that day watching my children, really watching them. Danny wouldn't let me put him down. He clung to me like I might disappear. When I tried to set him in his playpen so I could make lunch, he screamed so loudly, I thought the neighbors would call the police. Not fussy crying, terrified screaming. Ethan played quietly in his room, but every time I checked on him, he was just sitting on his bed staring at the wall. When I asked if he wanted to go to the park, he shook his head. What if Grandpa and Grandma are there, he asked. They won't be, I promise. But what if they are? What if they see us and they get mad that we're not at their house? What if they make me go to the quiet room? I sat down on his bed and pulled him close. Listen to me. No one is ever going to lock you in a room again. Not Grandma, not Grandpa, not anyone. Do you hear me? He nodded against my chest, but I could feel how tense he was, like he didn't quite believe me. That evening, my parents showed up at my house unannounced. I saw them through the window, and my first instinct was to not answer the door, to hide with my children like we were in danger, because we were. But I opened the door because I had been conditioned my entire life to comply with my parents' demands. This is unacceptable, my mother said, pushing past me. You can't simply keep the children from us without explanation. We've rearranged our entire lives to help you, and this is how you repay us. My father followed her, in his face stern. I expected better from you, Sarah. This kind of impulsive emotional decision-making is exactly why you need our help in the first place. I found my voice. Ethan told me about the quiet room. The temperature in the room dropped. My mother's face went blank. My father's expression didn't change at all. I don't know what you're talking about, my mother said carefully. The room in your basement, where you lock my children when they cry, when they make too much noise, when they don't meet your standards of perfection. My father's eyes narrowed. That child has an overactive imagination. You're taking the confused ramblings of a traumatized 5-year-old as fact. He described it in detail. I said, my voice shaking. He told me about the dark, about the lock on the outside of the door, about hearing Danny screaming while he was trapped in there. We use timeouts, my mother said coolly. All good parents use timeouts. It's a perfectly acceptable discipline technique. If Ethan interpreted that as something else, that's because you've raised him to be overly sensitive and dramatic. Timeouts don't leave bruises, I said. Danny has finger marks on his arms. Babies bruise easily, my father said. You're being hysterical. This is exactly what we warned you about, Sarah. You're too emotional to think clearly. You're seeing abuse where there's simply structure and discipline, just like your sister did. My sister, Audrey. She had left at 18 and never looked back. I had always thought she was being dramatic, holding on to old grudges. What if she had been trying to escape the same thing? I want you to leave, I said quietly. My mother's laugh was sharp and cold. And how exactly do you plan to manage without our help? You'll lose your job within a week. You'll lose this house. Those children will suffer because of your selfishness and your inability to see what's best for them. Get out of my house. My father took a step toward me, and I saw something in his face that I had been conditioned never to see. Threat, menace. The mask had slipped just for a second, and I saw what my children had been seeing. You're making a mistake, he said softly. We're their grandparents. We have rights. If we believe you're unfit, we can petition for custody. And given your mental state, your inability to maintain employment, your failure to provide adequate care, do you really think a judge would side with you? The implied threat hung in the air. He had been a judge. He knew judges. He had connections, influence, respectability. I was a grieving widow barely holding my life together, but I also had children who flinched when they were touched, who went silent when they should have been loud, who were terrified of their own grandparents. Leave, I said again, now, or I'll call the police. My mother gave me one last look, her face cold and perfect as marble. You always were weak, Sarah, just like we always told you. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to us for help. They left. I locked the door behind them and engaged the chain. Then I went to find my phone. The first person I called was Maria. We had been roommates in college, and she was the only person from my life before Logan who I still talked to regularly. She was also a family law attorney. She answered on the second ring. Sarah, what's wrong? I need help, I said. And then the words came pouring out. Everything Ethan had told me. The bruises on Danny, my parents' threats, the fear that they might actually be able to take my children away from me. Maria listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. First thing she said, her voice calm and professional. You did the right thing, keeping them away from your parents. Second thing, you need to take Danny to the pediatrician tomorrow and document those bruises. Get it in his medical record. Third thing, you need to report this to Child Protective Services. But what if they don't believe me? What if my parents are right and I'm just being emotional? Sarah, listen to me. Locking children in dark rooms is abuse. Full stop. It doesn't matter if they call it a timeout or discipline or training. It's abuse. And I'm going to help you prove it. She came over that night after I put the kids to bed. She sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and interviewed me like I was a client. Every detail I could remember, every change in my children's behavior, every bruise, every concerning thing my parents had said or done. We need more, she said finally. Right now it's your word against theirs. And they have reputation money connections. We need concrete evidence. Like what? Like recordings, like witnesses, like other children they've done this to. Other children, I stared at her. Maria pulled out her phone and started scrolling. I did some research while you were talking. Your parents have been offering babysitting services to multiple families in their neighborhood. There are posts in the local Facebook group from mothers praising their help. Lots of comments about how well-behaved the children become after spending time with your parents. I felt sick. How many children? How many kids had been locked in that room while their parents thought they were receiving quality care? We need to talk to those families, Maria said. Find out if any of them noticed similar changes in their children, similar bruises, similar fear responses. How do we do that without tipping off my parents? We don't. We let them think they've won. You apologize. You send the kids back. And while they're there, we gather evidence. I couldn't send my children back into that house knowing what I knew now. Maria reached across the table and took my hand. I know how hard this is, but we need proof that will hold up in court. We need something concrete that they can't explain away. And the best way to get that is to catch them in the act. She was right. I hated it, but she was right. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice cool and distant. I want to apologize. I said the words like ash in my mouth. I overreacted. Grief has made me paranoid. You and Dad have been wonderful with the children, and I appreciate everything you're doing for us. Can we start over? There was a pause. Then in a slightly warmer tone. Of course, dear. We understand you're under a great deal of stress. Shall we resume our usual schedule tomorrow? That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mom. After I hung up, I went to the bathroom and threw up. Maria had given me a tiny recording device, the kind that lawyers use to document client meetings. It looked like a USB drive and could record for 8 hours. I tucked it into the pocket of Ethan's backpack that night after he was asleep. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to him as I zipped the pocket closed. "I'm so sorry, baby." The next morning, I dressed Danny and had his bag ready when my mother arrived. He started crying the moment he saw her reaching for me desperately. "None of that," my mother said sharply, plucking him from my arms. "We've discussed this behavior. Crying doesn't get you what you want." Danny's cries got louder. I felt like every cell in my body was screaming at me not to let her take him. "I'll see you at 5, my mother said, already turning toward the door. When she left, I stood in my empty house and forced myself to breathe. Maria had made me promise I wouldn't go over there, wouldn't check on them, wouldn't do anything that might make my parents suspicious. I had to trust the plan. I couldn't work. I sat at my desk and stared at my computer screen and didn't see anything. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, thinking it was my mother calling to tell me something had happened, that she knew about the recording device, that my children were in danger. I picked up Ethan from school myself that day. When I pulled up in front of the building, I saw him standing with the other kindergartners waiting for pickup. But while the other kids were chattering and playing, Ethan stood perfectly still, his backpack held tightly against his chest, his eyes scanning the parking lot. When he saw my car, his whole body seemed to deflate with relief. He ran to me, something he hadn't done in weeks, and threw himself into my arms when I got out to meet him. "I love you so much," I whispered into his hair. "You're so brave. Just one more day, okay? Just one more day, and then I promise you'll never have to go back there." He nodded against my shoulder, and I felt his small body shaking. At my parents' house, I kept my face carefully neutral as my mother answered the door with Danny. He looked fine on the surface. Clean clothes, combed hair, no visible distress. But when she handed him to me, he grabbed onto my shirt with both fists and wouldn't let go. "He was very good today," my mother said. "Much better than yesterday. I think he's finally learning. Learning what I wanted to scream. Learning to be silent. Learning to suppress every natural instinct. Learning to be terrified of his own needs." But I just smiled and thanked her and left with both my children. That night, after they were both asleep, I sat in my closet with the recording device and a pair of headphones. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press play. At first, there was just the sound of the car-muffled voices as my mother drove to her house. Then footsteps, the sound of a door opening. My mother's voice bright and cheerful in a way that made my skin crawl. "Here we are. Now let's review the rules. Rule number 1, no crying. Crying is for babies who can't control themselves. You're a big boy now, Ethan. You're 5 years old. That's much too old to cry. Rule number 2, no unnecessary noise. Inside voices at all times. Rule number 3, complete obedience immediately. When grandma or grandpa tells you to do something, you do it right away without argument. Do you understand?" Ethan's small voice, "Yes, grandma." "Good. Now go do your homework at the dining room table. If you make a single mistake, you'll have to start over. Perfection is the goal. Nothing less is acceptable." More footsteps, the sound of a chair scraping, papers rustling. Then after maybe 20 minutes, Ethan's voice again tentative and small. "Grandma, I don't understand this problem. Can you help me?" My mother's response was sharp. "You're not thinking hard enough. I'm not going to give you the answers. Figure it out yourself. But I don't know how to multiply yet. We haven't learned it at school. Then you should have paid better attention when Grandpa explained it last week. This is exactly the kind of lazy thinking that will hold you back in life. You have 10 minutes to finish that worksheet. If it's not done perfectly by then, you know what happens." Silence. The sound of a pencil on paper, frantic now. Then a small choked sound, a sniffle. "Are you crying?" My mother's voice was cold. "Are you actually crying over homework?" I'm not, I just..." Ethan's voice was desperate, panicked. "I'm trying, Grandma, I'm really trying. Clearly not hard enough. You know the rule about crying. You know what happens when you break the rules. Please, Grandma, please, I'll be good, I'll stop." "I'm not crying anymore. See, I stopped." "Too late, you made the choice. Come with me." Footsteps, a door opening, the sound changing, becoming more echoey. They were going downstairs. "Please, please, I'll be so good. I promise." Ethan's voice was getting higher, more frantic. "I promise I won't cry anymore. Please don't put me in the quiet room." "This is for your own good," my mother said calmly. "You need to learn self-control. Emotions are weakness. Crying is giving up. Your grandfather and I are teaching you to be strong. One day you'll thank us for this." A door opening, a small dark space. I could hear it in the sound quality, the way Ethan's breathing suddenly seemed louder, more confined. "You'll stay here until you've learned your lesson," my mother said. "When you're ready to behave properly, you can knock on the door and tell me you're sorry for your weakness. But I warn you, if you cry or scream or make any noise at all, you'll stay in there twice as long." The door closed, a lock clicked, and then Ethan started to cry, trying so hard to be quiet about it, muffling the sounds with his hands, but crying nonetheless. Terrified, desperate crying. I stopped the recording. I couldn't listen anymore. I sat there in my closet, my hands pressed over my mouth to keep from screaming, tears streaming down my face. My mother, my own mother, the woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me. She had locked my 5-year-old son in a dark basement room and left him there alone and terrified, because he had cried over homework he didn't understand, and she thought she was teaching him strength. I forced myself to keep listening. I needed to hear all of it. I needed to know exactly what my children had been enduring. After what the timestamp showed was 37 minutes, there was the sound of the lock clicking again, the door opening. "Are you ready to apologize?" My mother's voice. "I'm sorry," Ethan's voice was hoarse, broken. "I'm sorry for crying. I won't do it again." "Good, now go wash your face and finish your homework. And remember, we don't tell Mommy about this. She's already very stressed and upset. If she knew you were being difficult, it would make her sad. You don't want to make Mommy sad, do you?" "No, Grandma." "Good boy. This is our special training just between us. It's how we're helping you become strong and successful like your grandfather. Your mother is weak. She cries too much. She can't handle stress. We're making sure you don't turn out like her." The recording continued. My father came home. There was the sound of Danny crying, that desperate, terrified crying I had heard too many times lately. "That baby is still having emotional outbursts." My father's voice stern and disapproving. "He's been difficult today," my mother replied. "I think he needs another session." Agreed. The crying is unacceptable. More footsteps. The sound changing again, that basement echo. Danny's cries getting louder, more frantic. "This is a very simple lesson," my father's voice said, cold and measured. "Crying accomplishes nothing. It's manipulative. It's a weakness we cannot tolerate. You will learn to self-soothe. You will learn control." "He's 8 months old," I wanted to scream. "He's a baby. Babies cry. That's how they communicate. That's normal. That's healthy." But my father didn't see it that way. To him, even an infant's cries were something to be trained out, suppressed, eliminated. The sound of the door closing. The lock. Danny's cries becoming muffled. "Check on him in 15 minutes, my father said. "If he's still crying, leave him for another 15. He'll learn." I turned off the recording. I had heard enough. More than enough. I called Maria immediately, even though it was nearly midnight. She answered, sounding groggy, but alert immediately when she heard my voice. "I have it. I have the recording. I'm coming over." She arrived 20 minutes later with her laptop and a portable speaker. We sat at my kitchen table and listened to the entire thing together. All 4 hours of it. By the end, Maria's face was pale and her hands were clenched into fists. "This is clear evidence of psychological abuse," she said. "More than enough for CPS. More than enough for a judge. Sarah, your parents are monsters." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I know, I just spent my whole life thinking I was the problem. That I was too sensitive, too emotional, too weak." "You're not weak. You survived them. That took incredible strength." The next morning, Maria made the calls. First to Child Protective Services, then to the police, then to a detective who specialized in child abuse cases. I gave my statement. I handed over the recording. I showed them the photographs I had taken of Danny's bruises. The detective, a woman named Sarah Chen, listened to the entire recording with a stone face. When it was over, she looked at me with something like fury in her eyes. "How many other children have they had access to?" she asked. "I don't know. But they've been advertising babysitting services in the neighborhood Facebook group for at least 6 months. She made a note. "We'll need to contact those families. And we'll need to inspect your parents' home. With your permission, I'd like to use this recording to get a warrant." "You have my permission." Things moved quickly after that. Detective Chen contacted the other families who had used my parents' services. Out of 8 families, 5 reported similar behavioral changes in their children. Increased anxiety, withdrawal, fear of loud noises, unexplained bruises. One mother, Maya Brooks, broke down crying when Detective Chen asked about her daughter. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "But they're so respectable. He's a judge. She volunteers with children. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was the bad parent for not trusting them." Another father reported that his 3-year-old son had started having nightmares about dark rooms and locked doors. He had asked his parents about it, but they had dismissed his concerns, telling him the child was just going through a phase. A phase. That's what my parents had trained us all to believe. That fear was a phase. That trauma was temporary. That children were resilient enough to withstand anything in the name of discipline. The warrant was approved within 48 hours. Detective Chen called me the morning they were going to execute it. "I want you to be there," she said. "You and your sister, if she's available. I think you both need to see this." Audrey. I hadn't spoken to my sister in almost 2 years. Our relationship had fractured around the time I got married, and I had convinced myself it was because she was holding on to old grudges, being dramatic about our childhood, refusing to forgive our parents for being strict. Now I understood she had been trying to protect herself from the people who had hurt her, and I had judged her for it. I called her. She answered after 6 rings, her voice wary. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about Mom and Dad, about what they've been doing to my kids." I told her everything, the quiet room, the recordings, the other children. When I finished, there was a long silence. "I tried to tell you," she said, finally, her voice thick with tears. "Years ago, when you told me you were pregnant with Ethan, I tried to warn you not to let them near your children, but you didn't believe me. I know, I'm so sorry, I should have listened. Are they going to prison? I hope so." She was quiet for another moment. "Then I'm getting on a plane. I'll be there tomorrow." She arrived the next morning, walking into my house, like no time had passed at all. She looked older than I remembered, harder somehow, but when she saw me, her face crumpled. "I'm sorry I left you there with them," she said. "I should have tried harder to get you out. I didn't want to leave. I thought you were wrong about them. I thought you were being difficult." We sat at my kitchen table and she told me her story. The years of emotional abuse, the quiet room that I had apparently blocked out so thoroughly that I couldn't remember it until she described it. The constant criticism, the impossible standards. The message repeated over and over that feelings were weakness and perfection was the only acceptable goal. "I left at 18, she said. "I saved every penny from my summer jobs. I applied to colleges as far away as possible. I got scholarships because I knew they would never pay for school if it meant losing control over me. And when I left, I never looked back. Until now. The day of the search warrant, Audrey, Maria, and I drove to our parents' neighborhood together. We parked down the street where we could see the house, but wouldn't be immediately visible. Detective Chen had told us to stay in the car to not interfere, but she understood why we needed to be there. We watched as 3 police cars pulled up. Child Protective Services, the licensing board for home child care, Detective Chen, and 2 other officers. My parents answered the door together, my mother in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, my father in a button-down and khakis. They looked confused, then affronted, then angry. We could see my father's mouth moving, probably saying something about his rights, his reputation. How dare they invade his home without cause? My mother stood perfectly still, her face frozen in that neutral, pleasant mask she had perfected over decades. Detective Chen held up the warrant. My father's face went red. He started gesturing, pointing at the officers, puffing up with indignation. They went inside. More cars pulled up. Maya Brooks, the mother of the 3-year-old, got out of one. She looked terrified. Another couple emerged from a second car. And then another. The families whose children had been hurt. All coming forward, all ready to confront the people they had trusted with their most precious things. The officers were inside for nearly an hour. When they emerged, they were carrying evidence bags, photographs of the basement, the chair, documentation of the lock that had been installed on the outside of the door. And then they brought out the children who were there that day. There were 2 of them, both toddlers, left in my parents' care by mothers who had to work. One of the children was Maya's daughter, Lily. She was 3 years old, and as she was carried out by a CPS worker, I could see bruises on her arms that matched the ones Danny had. Maya ran forward, crying, reaching for her daughter. The CPS worker spoke to her quietly, then handed Lily over. Maya buried her face in her child's hair and sobbed. My mother was still standing in the doorway watching this scene with no expression at all. No guilt, no shame, no acknowledgement that she had done anything wrong. My father was arguing with Detective Chen, his face red, his hands gesturing sharply. "This is outrageous." He took a step closer to her, his voice rising. "We're upstanding citizens. We've dedicated our lives to this community." He jabbed his finger in the air for emphasis. "You're destroying our reputation based on the manipulative lies of ungrateful children and hysterical parents." Detective Chen's response was calm and firm. "Judge Thorne, you need to stop talking. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." That's when my mother saw me. I had gotten out of the car without meaning to, drawn forward by some force I couldn't name. Our eyes met across the perfect lawn, across the chasm of years and trauma and betrayal. For just a second, something flickered in her face. Not remorse, not love, something harder to name, maybe recognition. Maybe the knowledge that her daughter had finally stood up to her. I walked across that lawn, Audrey on one side of me, Maria on the other. Neighbors were starting to gather, drawn by the police cars and the commotion. I could hear whispers, see curious faces peering from behind curtains. The perfect image my parents had cultivated for decades was crumbling in real time. My father saw me and his face contorted with rage. You did this. You destroyed your own family. You're vindictive and spiteful, and you'll regret this for the rest of your life. I stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to speak clearly, but far enough to be safe. You taught me that love was silence, I said, my voice steady and clear. That pain was discipline. That my feelings didn't matter. You tried to teach my children the same thing. You tried to break them the way you broke me. My mother's mask finally cracked. Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. We were helping you. We were teaching those children structure and self-control. You're too weak to do it yourself, so we stepped in. This is what good parenting looks like. Audrey stepped forward, her voice hard and cold. Good parenting doesn't leave children with nightmares. Good parenting doesn't involve locking toddlers in dark rooms. You didn't raise us, you trained us. Like dogs, like something to be controlled and shaped and broken, until we fit your image of perfection. My father turned his fury on Audrey. You've always been the problem. Difficult, rebellious, ungrateful. We gave you everything and you threw it back in our faces. You gave us trauma, Audrey said. You gave us anxiety and depression and an inability to trust our own feelings. You taught us that we were never good enough, that we had to earn love through perfect behavior, that our emotions were weaknesses to be suppressed. That's not parenting. That's abuse. Detective Chen stepped between us. That's enough. Judge Thorne, Mrs. Thorne, you're both being arrested for multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. My father exploded. I'm a judge. You can't arrest me. I have rights. I know the law. You're retired, Detective Chen said calmly. And you've broken the law. Multiple times. Against multiple children, including your own grandchildren. As they handcuffed my father, he turned back to me one more time. You'll never make it without us, he spat. You're too weak, too emotional. Those children will suffer because of your selfishness. You're a failure, Sarah. You always have been. The words hit me just like they had my entire life. For a second, I felt 5 years old again, standing in front of my father while he explained all the ways I was disappointing. Too sensitive, too clingy, too emotional, not smart enough, not disciplined enough, not good enough. But then I felt Audrey's hand in mine, Maria's arm around my shoulders. And I thought about my children, who were safe at home with Maria's wife, playing and laughing and making as much noise as they wanted. And I realized something. My father was wrong. He had always been wrong. I looked him in the eye, this man who had terrorized me for my entire life, and I spoke clearly. You're right about one thing. I am emotional. I do cry. I do feel things deeply. But that's not weakness. That's humanity. That's love. That's everything you two never understood and never will. I took a breath, feeling stronger than I had in my entire life. My children won't grow up silent and afraid. They won't grow up thinking they have to earn love through perfection. They'll know that feelings are okay, that crying is healthy, that mistakes are how we learn. They'll know they're loved exactly as they are. I turned to my mother, who was standing stiff and rigid as the officers prepared to escort them both to the police car. You told me I was too sensitive my whole life. You made me believe there was something wrong with me for feeling things. But you're the ones who are broken. You're the ones who don't know how to love. And I'm not going to let you break my children the way you broke me. My mother's face was still a mask, but I saw her hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough. As they led my parents to the police car, Maya Brooks approached me. She was still holding her daughter, who had her face buried in her mother's neck. Thank you, Maya said, tears streaming down her face. If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't been brave enough to report this, my daughter would still be going there. I would still be trusting them. You saved her. You saved all of our children. Other parents gathered around, echoing the same sentiments, thanking me, crying, showing me pictures of their children, telling me about the changes they had noticed, the fear they had felt, but dismissed the guilt they now carried for not seeing the truth sooner. We all missed it, I said. They were good at hiding it. They had decades of practice making people believe they were perfect, that they were helping, that anyone who questioned them was the problem. Detective Chen called the meeting for all the families 2 days later. We gathered in a community center conference room, parents and children, social workers, and therapists, lawyers and victim advocates. This is one of the most extensive cases of systematic child abuse I've encountered in my career, Detective Chen told us. Your parents, she said, looking at me and Audrey, were operating what amounted to an unlicensed, unregulated childcare facility. They had no training, no credentials, no oversight. And they were using psychologically abusive techniques on children as young as 6 months old. She showed us the evidence they had gathered from the house, not just the quiet room, but journals my mother had kept. Detailed logs of each child's misbehavior, as she called it. Pages and pages documenting every time a child cried, every time they talked too much, every time they failed to complete a task to her standards. And next to each entry, she had written the corrective action taken. Time in quiet room 15 minutes, time in quiet room 30 minutes. Reminder about acceptable behavior. Lesson in self-control. She had treated children like experiments, like problems to be solved, like obstacles to perfection that needed to be trained and shaped and controlled. The district attorney was pursuing criminal charges. Multiple counts of child abuse, child endangerment, operating an unlicensed childcare facility, and fraud. With the evidence we had, with the testimony of multiple families, with the recording I had made, the case was strong. But it wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection. My parents were prohibited from any contact with minors. They would be on the child abuse registry. They would never be able to work with children again, never be able to volunteer at schools or hospitals, never be able to be alone with their grandchildren. For my parents, who had spent their entire lives building a reputation of respectability and perfection, this was worse than prison. This was public acknowledgement that they had failed, that they were not the upstanding citizens they pretended to be, that the perfect image they had cultivated was a lie. The trial was long and painful. My parents hired expensive lawyers who tried every tactic they could think of. They painted me as mentally unstable, suffering from grief-induced psychosis. They brought in character witnesses who testified to their years of community service and charitable work. They argued that their discipline techniques were old-fashioned but well-intentioned, that they had never meant to harm anyone. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recording was played in court, and I watched the jury's faces as they listened to my mother coldly explaining to Ethan why she was locking him in a room, to my father describing an 8-month-old baby's cries as manipulative. Multiple families testified about the devastating impact on their children. Maya Brooks described how her daughter had started having panic attacks at age 3, and expert witnesses explained how isolation and systematic suppression of emotions caused this kind of trauma. Another mother testified that her son had stopped talking for weeks after spending time with my parents, which child development specialists identified as a classic response to psychological abuse. A father described finding his child hiding under the bed, terrified of being sent to the dark place, while experts testified that such techniques violated every principle of healthy child development and caused lasting damage by teaching children their feelings were unacceptable. Audrey testified about our childhood, about the quiet room I couldn't remember, about the years of emotional abuse and impossible standards. She was articulate and devastating, describing in clinical detail how our parents had shaped us into people who couldn't trust our own feelings, who believed we had to earn love through perfect behavior, who spent decades thinking we were the problem. And then I testified. I walked through everything. The weeks after Logan's death, when I was drowning and my parents showed up offering help that felt wrong from the start. The subtle ways they undermined my confidence and made me doubt my ability to parent my own children. The bruises on Danny, the changes in Ethan, the moment I realized what was really happening in that basement room. I described listening to that recording for the first time, hearing my son beg not to be locked away, hearing my mother's cold explanation of why she was doing it. I talked about the guilt I felt for not seeing it sooner, for entrusting my children to people I knew had damaged me, but had convinced myself were just strict. My parents' lawyer tried to discredit me, of course. He asked about my mental health history, my therapy, my grief, my struggles with work. He tried to paint me as an unstable, overreactive mother who had weaponized the legal system against parents who were only trying to help. But I didn't fall apart like I would have a year ago. I answered his questions calmly and clearly. Yes, I was grieving. Yes, I was overwhelmed. Yes, I had sought therapy to deal with the trauma of my childhood. And yes, that therapy is exactly what helped me recognize abuse when I saw my parents inflicting it on my children. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the verdict was guilty on all counts. My father's face went purple with rage. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression blank. Even in defeat, she maintained her mask of control. At sentencing, the judge, a woman with steel gray hair and compassionate eyes, addressed my parents directly. "You were given a position of trust," she said. "Parents entrusted you with their most precious gifts, their children, believing you would care for them and keep them safe. Instead, you systematically abused them. You used psychological torture techniques on infants and toddlers. You caused lasting trauma to vulnerable children. And you did it all while presenting yourselves as pillars of the community." She sentenced my father to 7 years in prison. My mother received 5 years. Both would be required to register as child abuse offenders upon release. Both were permanently prohibited from any contact with minors, including their own grandchildren. As they were led out of the courtroom, my father turned back one more time, his face twisted with hatred. "This is your fault," he mouthed at me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just stared back at him until he was gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The story had made local news, then regional, then national. Retired judge and wife convicted of systematic child abuse. The perfect couple with the dark secret. It was the kind of story that captured attention, that made people question who they trusted, that sparked conversations about the line between discipline and abuse. Maria handled the press. She gave a statement on behalf of all the families, thanking Detective Chen and the prosecutor's office, emphasizing that this was about protecting children, about believing them when they told us something was wrong, about breaking the cycle of abuse. I didn't speak to the reporters. I just wanted to go home to my children. The healing process was slow and difficult. Ethan started play therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma. Slowly, painfully, he began to talk about his experiences, to process the fear and confusion he had felt. He had nightmares for months. He would wake up screaming about locked doors and dark rooms and not being allowed to cry. But gradually, he started to improve. He laughed more. He asked questions again. He brought home artwork from school that was messy and colorful and perfect in its imperfection. His teacher told me he had started speaking up in class, raising his hand, volunteering answers, even when he wasn't sure they were right. "He's not afraid of making mistakes anymore," she said. "That's a huge step." Danny was so young that we hoped he wouldn't remember much of what had happened. But babies carry trauma in their bodies even when they can't articulate it. He worked with an occupational therapist on sensory integration, learning that the world could be safe, that loud noises wouldn't hurt him, that he was allowed to express his needs. At his first birthday party, he laughed. A real, genuine belly laugh when his cousin did something silly. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Audrey moved into an apartment 10 minutes from my house. We started having dinner together once a week, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with the kids and Maria. We talked about our childhood, comparing notes, filling in gaps in each other's memories. She helped me remember things I had blocked out. The quiet room that I had spent so much time in, that I had learned to dissociate, to leave my body to go somewhere else in my mind, until they let me out. The constant criticism, the impossible standards, the message repeated so often that it became the soundtrack of my childhood, that I was not good enough, would never be good enough, needed to try harder, be better, be perfect. "You know what the hardest part is?" Audrey said one night over wine after the kids were in bed. "Knowing that they genuinely believe they didn't do anything wrong. They honestly think they were good parents, that they were helping us, that we're the ones who are broken for not appreciating their discipline. That's what makes it abuse instead of just bad parenting," I said. "The absolute conviction that they're right, that their way is the only way, that anyone who questions them is weak or ungrateful or defective." We started a support group for survivors of emotionally abusive parenting. It met once a month at the community center. The first meeting, we expected maybe 5 or 6 people. 23 showed up. People told their stories, parents who had used similar techniques. The quiet room variations, locked closets, basements, garages, bathrooms. The constant criticism masked as wanting the best for you. The impossible standards. The message that feelings were weakness. The damage that lasted long after they left home. "We all thought we were alone," one woman said, tears streaming down her face. "We all thought it was just us, that we were too sensitive, that we were the problem. But we're not, they're the problem. And we survived them." I started writing about my experiences. First, just for myself in a journal my therapist recommended. But then I started a blog anonymous, at first describing what had happened, what I had learned, how I was healing. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out sharing their own stories, thanking me for putting words to experiences they had never been able to articulate. Maria helped me turn it into something bigger. We created a website with resources for people escaping abusive family relationships, legal information, therapy referrals, support groups, a hotline for people who needed to talk to someone who understood. And we created a program to help single parents who were struggling, who might be vulnerable to offers of help from people who would hurt their children. Free childcare resources, emergency support, a network of screen-trained, trustworthy caregivers who believed in gentle, respectful parenting. I named it Logan's Legacy, because my husband had loved our children with his whole heart, and he would have moved heaven and earth to protect them. Now I was doing it for him. My career stabilized. Jennifer, my boss, had been supportive throughout the trial, giving me time off, flexible hours, understanding when I needed to be with my children. When I explained everything that had happened, she was horrified. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she said. "And I'm sorry if I added to your stress during that time. I didn't understand what you were dealing with." She promoted me 6 months later, recognizing the strength it took to keep working through everything, the creativity I brought to projects, even when my personal life was in chaos. 1 year after my parents' conviction, on the anniversary of Logan's death, we went back to the lake where we used to go as a family. It was a clear, beautiful day, the water sparkling in the sunlight. Audrey came with us, and Maria and her wife. We brought a picnic, blankets, toys for the kids. Ethan ran around chasing butterflies. Danny sat in the sand digging with a shovel, making delighted sounds every time he found a pebble. We released balloons like I had imagined, biodegradable ones with messages attached. But this time, Ethan's message was different. "I'm not afraid anymore," it said, "and I'm okay to cry when I'm sad." We watched the balloons float up into the sky, carrying our words with them. Ethan leaned against me, and I wrapped my arm around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the realness of him, the beautiful imperfection of this child I loved more than anything. After everyone left, I sat on the blanket with my laptop and wrote a letter to my children, one they could read when they were older. "I want you to know something," I wrote. "Love is never silent. Love is loud and messy and imperfect. Love means protecting each other even when it's hard. Love means speaking up when something is wrong. Love means believing people when they tell you they're hurting. If anyone ever tells you that love requires you to be quiet, to hide your pain, to pretend everything is fine when it isn't, I want you to know that's not love, that's control, and you deserve better. You deserve to be heard, to be safe, to be exactly who you are with all your feelings and needs and imperfections. That's what real love looks like." That evening, we went home to our house, the one that was too messy and too loud and absolutely perfect. I made dinner while Ethan told me elaborate stories about the butterflies he had seen. Danny banged on his high chair tray, babbling happily, throwing pieces of food on the floor. It was chaotic and exhausting, and nothing like the perfect, controlled environment my parents would have approved of. And I had never been happier. Later, after I had put both kids to bed, I stood in the doorway of their room and watched them sleep. Ethan's nightlight cast gentle shadows. Danny snored softly. Everything was peaceful in the way that comes from genuine safety, not enforced silence. The only quiet room in this house now was a blanket fort in the living room filled with fairy lights and picture books, and the only rule in that room was that everyone was safe. I thought about the Sarah I used to be, the one who believed she had to earn love through perfection, the one who thought speaking up was selfish, the one who had almost let her children be damaged the same way she had been. That Sarah was still part of me, the scared little girl who had learned to be quiet, to not take up space, to prioritize everyone else's comfort over her own safety. She would always be there, probably. Trauma doesn't just disappear. But she didn't control me anymore. I controlled my own life now. I made my own choices, and I chose my children. I chose their safety. I chose their right to be loud and messy and imperfect. I chose love, the real kind, the kind that protects, the kind that speaks up, the kind that says enough. And if being that kind of mother meant I was too sensitive, too emotional, too weak by my parents' standards, then I would wear those labels proudly. Because my children would grow up knowing they were safe, that they were loved, that their feelings mattered, that they never had to earn the right to take up space in this world. And that I had learned was what strength really looked like.